The Colorado River cut through the rugged landscape like a silver ribbon, its waters glinting under the early morning sun. Mist clung to the banks, curling around the rocks and reeds, giving the place an ethereal, almost otherworldly feel. A lone traveler, a man in his early 30s with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, rode slowly along the riverbank, scanning the water for signs of wildlife. His horse snorted nervously, sensing something unusual in the air. He tightened his grip on the reins and leaned forward, ears straining to catch any sound beyond the soft rush of water. Suddenly, a panicked scream broke the morning calm. The man's heart leapt into his throat. Downriver, he spotted her, a woman, enormous in stature and unmistakably strong, thrashing against the relentless current. Her dark hair streamed behind her like a river of night, and her eyes were wide with fear. She fought with every ounce of strength, but the river was merciless. Rocks jutted from the water, threatening to crush her as she struggled to stay afloat. The traveler didn't think twice. With a quick command to his horse, he kicked it into a gallop and leapt toward the water's edge. He waded in, feeling the icy current bite at his legs, threatening to pull him under. He called out to her, keeping his voice steady despite the pounding of adrenaline in his chest. Inch by inch, he fought the river, reaching her just as her strength began to falter. Gripping her arm firmly, he pulled her toward a shallow bend, each movement a battle against nature itself. Rocks scraped his hands, and water filled his mouth, but he refused to let go. Finally, with a final surge, he dragged her onto the riverbank. Both of them collapsed onto the damp earth, coughing and shivering, their chests heaving from exertion and fear. The woman's dark eyes met his, a mixture of astonishment, gratitude, and something unspoken flickering in their depths. "Thank you," she gasped, her voice low but strong, carrying the weight of someone used to commanding respect. He shook his head, brushing wet hair from his face. "I couldn't just stand by," he said, his words barely audible over the gurgling of the river. For a long moment, they just stared at one another, two strangers brought together by chance and courage. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath. Birds froze mid-flight, and the river's roar softened into a gentle murmur. The man helped the woman to her feet, noting the strength in her shoulders and the way she towered over him despite the exhaustion etched into her face. There was something remarkable about her, not just her size, but the aura of resilience and pride that seemed to radiate from her very being. He realized that saving her had been more than an act of heroism, it had been the first brush with a story far greater than he could yet imagine, one that would change the course of his quiet life along the river forever. By the time the morning sun fully broke through the mist, the giant Apache woman had gathered her composure. She brushed the mud from her long dark hair and offered a small, proud nod to the man who had risked himself to save her. "I am Nayeli," she said, her voice deep and resonant, carrying a musical cadence that seemed to echo across the riverbank. He introduced himself as well, trying not to stare at her height and strength, which made her presence almost monumental. There was a quiet dignity about her, a calm authority that belied the struggle they had just endured. The traveler noticed the faint markings on her clothing, intricate patterns stitched into the leather of her tunic, symbols he did not recognize but sensed were deeply meaningful. Nayeli spoke of her family, her tribe, and the river's sacred importance. She explained that the river had always been a place of life and sustenance for her people, but it could also be unforgiving to those who underestimated its power. The man listened intently, fascinated not only by her stories but by the careful balance of strength and grace she carried. He had encountered many people on his journeys, but few left him feeling both humbled and inspired at the same time. After a modest breakfast he had prepared by a small campfire, dried meat and river fish cooked over the flames, they began to talk more casually. Nayeli laughed as she recounted tales of her youth, of days spent running across the plains, hunting, and learning her people's traditions. The man shared his own experiences, describing life on the outskirts of the settlement, his solitary travels, and the occasional dangers of the wilderness. Their laughter rang out across the water, mingling with the chirping of birds and the gentle lapping of the river against the rocks. In the span of a few hours, a bond began to form, delicate but undeniable, born from trust and shared survival. As the morning wore on, Nayeli grew more comfortable, showing him a few practical skills: how to read the river's currents, how to identify safe passage points, and even how to spot hidden dangers beneath the water's surface. He was both amazed and grateful for her knowledge, realizing that her strength was matched by intelligence and wisdom honed over years of experience. For her part, Nayeli seemed to appreciate his steady calm, the way he acted without hesitation in moments of crisis, and the respect he showed for her as both a person and a warrior. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the man and Nayeli sat together on the riverbank, their legs dangling toward the water, sharing silence as much as conversation. There was an unspoken understanding between them. This encounter had been more than mere chance. The river had brought them together, but it had also set the stage for a story neither could yet fully comprehend, a story that would soon lead to unexpected visitors, honor, and a reward that transcended material value. The next morning, the man was tending his horse near the riverbank when he noticed movement in the distance. A group was approaching, moving with a quiet, measured purpose. At their head was a tall, imposing Apache man, his presence commanding even from afar. His dark eyes scanned the riverbank, sharp and assessing, taking in every detail, the horses, the campsite, and the stranger who had spent the previous day saving his daughter. The traveler straightened, feeling a sudden tension settle over him. Something in the man's stance spoke of authority and expectation, and he realized he was in the presence of someone important, someone not to be underestimated. As they drew closer, Nayeli appeared at his side, walking with a confident stride that mirrored her father's. She looked back at him, giving a reassuring nod. The traveler stepped forward, unsure of the proper etiquette but determined to show respect. The Apache man studied him for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice deep and commanding, a single word that carried weight: "Why?" The traveler's throat went dry. I saved her," he said carefully. "She was in the river, struggling against the current. I couldn't just leave her." He met the man's piercing gaze, hoping his sincerity would be enough. Nayeli's father's eyes softened slightly, though his posture remained firm. He gestured for the traveler to follow him a few steps aside. The others in the group stood quietly, watching, their presence adding a sense of ceremony to the encounter. From a pouch at his side, the Apache man drew out a small, intricately carved silver medallion. Its surface shimmered in the morning light, etched with symbols and patterns that seemed to tell a story older than memory. He extended it toward the traveler, who hesitated, unsure if he should accept such an honor. "This is a token of respect," the father said finally. "It is given only to those who risk themselves for the life of another. You have proven your courage and your honor. Accept it, and know you are welcome among my people." The traveler felt a surge of emotions, gratitude, humility, and awe. He took the medallion carefully, feeling its weight and the history it carried. Nayeli smiled at him, pride shining in her eyes, while her father nodded approvingly. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was filled with understanding, a recognition of bravery, respect, and connection. For the first time in years, the traveler felt the profound impact of his actions beyond immediate survival or heroism. They spent the next hour together, sharing stories and laughter, and the traveler realized that the river, which had once seemed merely a dangerous place, had become a bridge between worlds. He had crossed paths with courage, honor, and tradition, and in return, he had received a gift far more meaningful than gold or silver, a bond of trust and recognition from a proud and noble family. As he watched Nayeli and her father ride away, the medallion warm in his hand, he knew his life had changed in ways he could never have predicted, all because of a river, a struggle, and a giant Apache woman who refused to surrender. The sun dipped low over the Colorado River, casting long, golden shadows across the rugged landscape. The traveler sat on a smooth river rock, the silver medallion resting in his palm. He turned it over carefully, tracing the etched patterns that seemed alive with stories of generations past. The weight of it was more than physical, it carried honor, gratitude, and a connection that transcended words. He thought of Nayeli, her laughter echoing in his memory, her strength, her wisdom, and the way she had looked at him with trust and respect. It was a bond forged in courage and shared danger, a bond he knew would remain with him forever. He mounted his horse slowly, glancing once more at the river that had changed everything. Once a place of quiet solitude and careful observation, it had become a symbol of fate and opportunity. The river had tested both him and Nayeli, but it had also brought them together, linking two very different lives through a single moment of bravery. As he rode back toward the settlement, he realized that the reward he had received, honor, friendship, and trust, was far more valuable than any tangible treasure. It was a reminder that courage and compassion never go unnoticed, even in the most unexpected places. Days passed, and the story of the rescue spread quietly among nearby settlements. Travelers spoke of the man who had saved a giant Apache woman from the river, and of the medallion that her father had bestowed in recognition. But for the traveler, it was not the whispers of admiration that mattered, it was the experience itself, the knowledge that he had acted with integrity when it counted most. Each morning, he would glance at the river with a sense of reverence, remembering the struggle, the fear, and the awe-inspiring strength of Nayeli. Weeks later, as he walked along the riverbank checking traps for fish, he noticed a familiar figure approaching. Nayeli stood there, smiling, her eyes bright with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived much and learned even more. She carried no urgency, only the warmth of companionship. "I came to thank you again," she said simply, her voice carrying across the water. He nodded, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't realized he needed. In her presence, the world felt larger, richer, and more alive. They spent the afternoon sharing stories, teaching one another skills, and learning from each other's experiences. The traveler showed her methods of navigating the river and reading the land, while Nayeli shared the traditions of her people, her wisdom, and the deep respect her tribe held for nature and family. When the sun finally set, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, they sat side by side, content in the shared silence of understanding. As darkness fell, he understood what the river had truly given him. Beyond danger, beyond reward, it had offered connection, an unbreakable link between lives that might never have crossed otherwise. He held the medallion one last time, feeling the promise it represented, that courage, kindness, and honor can create bonds stronger than fear, wealth, or distance. And in that quiet twilight, with the river whispering its eternal song, he knew that this story, of a man, a giant Apache woman, and a river, would stay with him forever, shaping the man he was and the life he would lead from that day onward.